And now we have the opportunity to hear from the great Kohan Ilya Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. You may all be seated. If everyone could be turning over in the book of Yahweh to Matithia chapter 24. Matithia chapter 24. We're gonna try to move rather quickly, so we want everyone to see something before this is over with. And I hope that everyone will get out of this the honor that our overseer has before the kingdom of Yahweh at this time. And how pleased that Yahweh and the high priest Yahshua Messiah is with the work of his servant and every individual that tethers herself together with the servant. You know, we were thinking back, speaking with a lot of the priests who, when you see a lot of this work done, there's a massive group of people that play into this. Every man, woman, and child. Names that you may not see here. It's amazing how many people play into this work. And without each and every one of them, us, each individual that you see in this sanctuary that live abroad, other countries, this work actually would not get done to the ability that it's getting done. So everyone needs to give themselves a round of applause for tethering themselves to the branch. I remembered back when myself and four other priests went to Purcell and Lexington for, I think it was the third time. And we were standing on the east side of the Canadian River over in Lexington. And we were standing around the area that would have been where Pastor would have been born, on that side of the riverbank. And as we stood there, I called him and I was speaking with him. And I said, it's magnificent to stand where Yahweh's witness was born. It was truly an honor to actually see these things because these things come to life. And he said, it's not where I was born, it's where the work of Yahweh was born. And that's one thing that he always stressed throughout everything that we've done. Many of the priests involved in these things, many of them. It was always the work. It's never been about the person, but the work. And Yisrayl Hawkins being the head over that work. But in Matithia chapter 24, and keep that in mind as we go along, because that means a lot when we get to the end. In Matithia chapter 24, and look at verse 37. In verse 37 it says, "But just as in the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For just as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying while given in marriage, until the day Noah went into the ark." And if you've ever had the privilege of listening to the books of Yahweh on tape, I think it portrays it very well, the accusations that we know that Noah would have endured, the being made fun of, you think you have to lock yourself inside of this to do what? Are you crazy? But Noah obeyed Yahweh. He listened to what Yahweh said. No matter what anyone said against Noah, and you could imagine the ridicule he would have suffered. Similar to what we've seen in these last days. You know, today is a very special day when you look back in the history of the House of Yahweh. It was 6 years ago today, Pastor informed us in this world about the nuclear baby. It was on January the 14th of 2006. And we're going to get into that a little bit later too, because we're going to see how all of these came to pass and how the signs that have been shown, especially to our overseer, are an acknowledgement of the work that's being done in these last days. If you'll turn over quickly to Genesis chapter 6 on page 4. Genesis chapter 6 on page 4. And keep in mind these two systems that have been growing side by side. And look at the confusion that's in this world today. I was watching the news this week, and they were reporting on it was either 3 or 4 soldiers that had, we'll say, dishonored, for lack of uncovering things we shouldn't. They were dishonoring some Taliban fighters after they had murdered them. And this was an act of war, but they said they had dishonored them by desecrating their bodies. In fact, one of the news agencies said that it was barbaric what they had done. The amazing fact that I seen in that, well, here's a news agency reporting that what they done to these bodies after they murdered them was barbaric. Why do we honor a corpse after we've murdered them? That's the system of this world. The decisions and the things they say, they don't even make sense. Why would they not have honored these men and treated them as a valuable possession before they murdered them? Why not? Praise Yahweh. That's what Yisrayl Hawkins brings in these last days. To love everyone and show everyone honor. And we all have to make that choice. But in Genesis, as Noah went through this very same thing, we're going to skip around here rather quickly, but in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them." Now look down to verse 3. It says, "And Yahweh said, the men of this world will never subject themselves to my word, which are the laws and the prophets, for they are indeed carnally minded. Thus their days shall be 120 years. Carnally minded, rejecting the peaceful solution, rejecting the character of Yahweh, the Spirit of Yahweh, turning against from that and going their own way. In verse 5 it says, "Then Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil and continual." The intent and thoughts of man's heart. Man had not only went about his own way, but the desire to control his thoughts, which were leading to his actions, had already surpassed him. That very simple concept that the youngest child in the house of Yahweh in these last days can tell you that everything you do begins with a thought. And that thought will lead to an action. And an uncontrolled thought, well, they lead to bad consequences, negative situations, or as the Peaceful Solution says, a really bad scene. But look in verse 8. "But Noah found regard and honor in the eyes of Yahweh." Amongst all of the God worship that was taking place, all of the sin, all of the rejection, Noah found honor in Yahweh's eyes. And look down to verse 18. "But I will establish my covenant with you," speaking of Noah, "and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you." The ark, the place of safety that was set aside for Noah at that time. Yahweh giving Noah the instructions on how to build the ark. Look over to 7. "Then Yahweh said to Noah, come into the ark, you and your household, for I have seen you righteous before me in this generation." In Noah's generation, Noah's righteousness and his family, among a multitude that were here on this earth, Yahweh recognized him and his works. Even though no man recognized Noah, Yahweh did. Yahweh being faithful to his people. And in verse 5, why did Yahweh recognize Noah? "And Noah did according to all that Yahweh commanded him to do." He did exactly what Yahweh had commanded him to do, not going to the left or to the right. Now look over to chapter 8 and verse 1. Chapter 8 and verse 1. "Then Yahweh remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that came with him in the ark, and Yahweh made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters receded." Noah complied with each and everything Yahweh had told him to do, and Yahweh not only saving Noah, but the animals that were held back and clean, Yahweh recognized them also, held them as honor in his sight. And after Noah completing what he was told to do, which remember, Noah did not have to do it. Noah chose to do it. Just like in these last days, if we learn to control our thoughts, which will lead to our actions, if we put 100% belief into the one whom Yahweh has sent, they do seem like a decision without options. Because if you want life, the only choice you have in these last days, you and I both, are to follow the one sent in everything that he says. Look over to chapter 9 and verse 11. Chapter 9 and verse 11. "After Noah complied, and he did what Yahweh instructed him to do, Yahweh said, thus I will establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And Yahweh said, this shall be a sign of the covenant which I make between me and you. and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. In verse 13 he says, I set my rainbow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And it shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that a rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. Now, a lot of us, when we see these things, we just take them for granted. We see a rainbow in the cloud, and even the Christian world today, people who are non-religious can tell you what a rainbow represents. They recall that to mind. But remember, what was shown to Noah was, you've complied with what I've said, and this is my covenant with you. It was an acknowledgement from Yahweh that Noah had done a job, and he had done it exactly like he was told to do it, and Yahweh honored him and actually ratified that covenant with not only words, but also with a sign. Quickly turn over to Isaiah chapter 49. Isaiah chapter 49, found on page 561. We're going to be coming back here, but I want to make sure everyone gets this in their mind, because this scripture always comes to mind with everything that's done in these last days. To me, it's a very important scripture, and I try to always keep it in the forefront of my mind to remind me how these things will be done in these last days. In verse 3 it says, Yahweh saying, and he said to me, you are my servant, O Yisrayl, through whom I will be glorified. Through whom I will be glorified on this earth. But remember, pastor, having a choice. Not being made to do anything, but having a choice whether he wanted to serve Yahweh or whether he didn't. Pastor said long ago he set his mind to follow what Yahweh had said do, and that he would not relent from it. But he set his mind to do his job. Turn over to Yana on page 702. Yana on page 702. And let's look at another prophet of Yahweh who was trained in Yahweh's way. And we're going to start reading from chapter 1 and verse 1. And it says, the word of Yahweh came to Yana, son of Amittai, saying, rise up and go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. In verse 3 it says, but Yana rose up to flee to Tarshish. He rose up to flee. Yahweh instructing Yana on what to do, he rose up to flee. So what did Yahweh do? Look down to chapter 3 and verse 1. Then the word of Yahweh came to Yana the second time, saying, rise up and go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach against it the message that I will tell you. In verse 4, it says that Yana, he rose up, and so he began to enter the city for a day's journey, and he cried out, saying, only 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. In verse 6 it says, for when word came to the king of Nineveh, he arose from his throne, and he laid aside his robes, he covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in the ashes. And he made proclamation and commanded in Nineveh by decree of the king that his nobles, saying, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink. But let every man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them cry out to Yahweh zealously. Yes, let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in their hands. Who can tell if Yahweh will turn and relent? Who can tell? But remember, Yahweh recognized Nineveh. He's seen the repentance, and Yahweh relented. Not that the wrath of Yahweh, as the Christians would teach, that Yahweh's setting to destroy people. Yahweh's allowing things to take place. And through the repentance, which were changing their thoughts, what led to the actions of the curse, caused these things not to come about. But in verse 4 it shows, but this greatly displeased Yana, and he was very angry. He prayed to Yahweh and said, oh, Yahweh, was this not what I said when I was just in my country? This is why I fled to Tarshish before. For I know you are a compassionate, merciful Father, slow to anger and great of kindness, who relents from sending calamity. Yahweh being a very caring person. But notice, even though Yana relented a second time, imagine the mindset of Yahweh to know this man would do such a thing, and to use this man's actual lack of diligence at the time to represent the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. how he would be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, just as the prophet Yonah. Imagine what it takes for Yahweh's mind to say these things thousands of years in advance, for it to be in his plan. But Yonah did see it through, and these things were put into play in the last days for us to see and for us to learn, and we can see these things before our very eyes in these last days of what occurs when Noah did what he was supposed to do exactly as he was supposed to do it, and then Yonah hesitated. But we can see in scriptures where some just blatantly turned against Yahweh and refused to do it altogether. If you could, turn over to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, found on page 743. In Matthew chapter 16, chapter 1, it says, "Then the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to him," speaking of Yahshua, "and to test him, and they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, 'When it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. Then in morning, it will be stormy weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. O you hypocrites! You can discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Yonah.' Then he left him and went away." You know, I've heard people make confusing statements saying that Yahshua Messiah said only a wicked and perverse generation seeks a sign, but that's not what he said. He said that there was a sign given to them in that generation, but they did not accept the sign that was offered. And that's all Yahweh had to offer them. That's all Yahweh intended to offer them. That was Yahweh's plan from the beginning. In the second book of Yisrayl, sixth book of Yisrayl. Second book of Yisrayl is one of the best. That's the one we're going over in the workshops, and it's definitely someone who can take the second book of Yisrayl and apply that book to their life completely will, in no doubt, become perfect before Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. In the second book of Yisrayl, page 1, this is how it starts out. It says, "May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The feast is in April. We don't have much time. I want you to write down a date. It's going to be hard to buy anything after this date. September the 12th, 2006. That is the date we're going to have nuclear war." That's the date we're going to have nuclear war. He goes on to say, "No, I'm not a prophet, and I'm not claiming to be. I'm an Oki whom Yahweh has chose to tell you and to warn you about these things. You had better start thinking along the lines and preparing for this last time period." Now he went on to say, Pastor did, that you're not going to get this message directly from Yahweh. You're going to have to go to his house and hear it. You're going to have to believe it and stand up and not deny it. You can't go around whispering behind my back saying, "I hope he's right." That's stupidity and ignorance. It's showing Yahweh how undependable you are when you can't stand up for what he says. I don't care if this prophecy doesn't come to pass on that date. You have been warned, as Yahweh shows you would. Praise Yahweh. You know, I remember Pastor saying, he said that someone had said to him, what if this date nothing comes to pass? And I remember Pastor said, "It's not my job to make the prophecies come to pass. It's my job to warn the people. How can I not warn the people?" And think of the ridicule that he went through. After being arrested, I remember him going on some major news channels, one of the most major news channels here in America, and the ridicule he suffered about the nuclear baby, about the comments he had made. In fact, I remember one of the reporters who's fairly popular here in America making the comment, "Nuclear baby. What? Never heard such a thing. I don't even think we should have him back on here." You know, and I thought to myself, you're right, you're not honored enough to have him back. You really aren't. In fact, I can see if you watch Yahweh Prophetic News, I just seen it was a young lady interviewing him not long ago, did a much better job than what I've ever seen these local news channels or the news channels out here that people pay to see, did a much better job and actually got the facts. Actually brought a story worth hearing. Now in verse 89 of the 6th book of Yisrayl, on page 19, it says, the wars doesn't start with the first shot. The wars start with planning. I'm telling you, they have the time period set to begin war September 12, 2006. It's been in the plans probably for years. You're going to see it. Notice, you're going to see it. That's when Yahweh is going to bring His house forward. He's going to make you known to the world. People are so afraid that they're going to suffer ridicule that they can't think about what they're doing or about doing the work of Yahweh. And there was many people who left at a certain time. When Pastor was arrested, Pastor told us continually, it's not my test what's going on, it's yours, it's ours. We're the one on trial. And remember the unity that came together when he was arrested on February the 12th. If you go back and you look at the books of Yisrayl, the 7th and the 8th book of Yisrayl, part 2 of each one, read the last parts of those books. Look at the letters, even the children. Women, men, and children coming in complete unity to stand behind the one sent. To stand behind the words that Yisrael Hawkins has spoken. Now, Pastor spoke these things and many ridiculed him. And he also showed how it would lead up to June the 12th of 2007. Many ridiculed him. Pastor said, once again, it's not my job to make these prophecies come to pass. Yahweh can do what He sees fit when He sees fit to do it. And he told us many times that Yahweh may allow us to have more time. But remember, once again, think of the ridicule that Pastor went through. The people that walked away from him, those who could have brought forth a really decent news story to this world. You know, it amazed me as the major news station in Atlanta, Georgia was bashing him. Just 3 miles down the road, 3 kahans and a deacon stood in their Capitol building as they praised him. They praised the work he was doing with the peaceful solution. You know, the politicians of today, you hear them make comments like, what we need is a program to change the hearts and the minds. And they have said that recently. One even said what we need is a peaceful solution. And these are people that this program has been presented to. They've seen this. It's been offered to them. They have the ability to make a change if they want to. Our President of the United States has the ability to make a change, to make this world a better place, to do the things that need to be done to bring these things out. I want to show you real quickly before we get into one more thing. Get this to come in. I want you to notice the date on the article if you can see it. I don't think you can. This article came out August the 25th of 2011. August the 25th of 2011. Now that was the same day that Pastor seen the donkey staring at the olive tree, that he said that it showed that Yeshua Messiah was pleased with his house. Praise Yahweh. Now that very same day, this is what the headlines were. Cheney, I urged Bush to bomb Syria's nuclear reactor, but he refused. And it says, former U.S. President Dick Cheney, or Vice President Dick Cheney, urged the United States to bomb a suspected Syrian nuclear reactor plant in June of 2007. According to Cheney, former U.S. President George W. Bush refused his demands and opted for a diplomatic approach after advisors expressed apprehension. Now, Dick Cheney went on to say, I made the case for U.S. military action against the reactor. Cheney also went on to say, but I was a lone voice. After I finished, the president asked, does anyone here agree with the vice president? Not a single hand went up around the room. Pastor said it started with plans. What would have occurred if those hands would have went up and they would have agreed upon it? The adversary had definitely put someone there to push forth this plan. And all that ridicule and all these accusations that came to pass saying, nuclear baby, who heard of such a thing? even on the day, the month, the year, when this finally came out for everyone to see, after Cheney and Bush had left office, writing memoirs for others to see, on the very same day, Yahweh shows, or Yahshua Messiah, showing a sign from heaven that they are pleased with the witness that he stood firm in what he said he would do. He didn't relent. He sounded the trumpet. Even though the nuclear wars didn't come to pass, he sounded the trumpet for all to hear in these last days. Now, we want to play something at this time, and I want everyone to pay careful attention to what's being shown. We're going to show you the clip from the Feast of Trumpets that took place this past year and the sighting of the new moon. And keep in mind, these clouds were moving rapidly, but also keep in mind that when you see these, and I'm not sure how well it's going to show up on the projection screen, but anyone that wants to see these pictures close up are more than welcome to do so. We actually considered highlighting it where everyone could tell it, and we thought, you know what, if it's a great enough sign for Yahshua Messiah, it's a great enough sign for us. We're not doing anything to it because it's obviously there. But if you can, go ahead and play the video, and I'll do a little bit of description when we get into it. If you notice carefully, Pastor just got his phone call. This being after the new moon being sighted, it was actually very late sighting that night, so it already became dark. And for those of you that can't make it out, this is the upper part, and those are the priests blowing the shofars for all to hear that the new moon had been sighted and the Feast of Trumpets had begun. This was the view, and that was standing behind Pastor. And notice to his left-hand side the cloud that goes from the tree line and proceeds on up. We're going to pull back, and when you see this cloud, notice the bottom left and the upper right of the cloud. And you'll see how there's light colors in it. What we did, I had a deacon drop the tree, because when I first seen the cloud, I told the deacon, I said, I really can't see it. Drop the tree in it. He dropped the tree in it, and you can see, even though the cloud had started to descend, the bottom left took the shape, and then the upper right took perfect shape, making the contours all the way up. Now that seemed amazing, but look at the shades in the olive tree itself. There was a darker cloud that was above that one, and it may be hard to see here, but you can see it close up. That darker cloud came down upon that cloud and took the exact shape of the darkness inside of that olive tree. And when I seen that, I thought, there's no way that that is a coincidence that, as Pastor said, a faithful watcher would notice such a thing, and that Yahweh would choose such a great logo designed by one of his mighty priests. And then all of these lines come that close to matching perfectly. Praise Yahweh. Now, really quickly, you don't have to turn over there. I'll read to you really quickly. I want to read to everyone out of Acts chapter 2 and verse 16 through 19. It says, "But this is the beginning of that which was spoken of by the prophet Yisrayl." And this is the Apostle Kepha speaking. And this was after Spirit Holy had been poured out upon the 120. "And it came to pass in the last days, says Yahweh, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh." Now all flesh are those who are called, that Yahweh is recognizing. "And your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. Yes, on my servants and my handmaidens I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. And I will show wonders in heaven and above, and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and pillars of smoke." Notice in the prophecy of Yael and the Apostle Kepha repeating it, not one person is left out. If you noticed all the people that were on top of that sanctuary, none of us seen it. It came from someone that wasn't on top of that sanctuary, and I'll leave that for Pastor to identify whenever he sees fit. But I tell you what, it can't be done without the women. It can't be done without the men. It can't be done without every individual in this house coming forward and standing behind the one sent. I'm going to end right here on a note, but I want to put in everyone's mind, if you're not involved in the work, if you see these commercials, you see these videos, you see all the things taking place, if you're not involved and you want to be, there's people that are put over each area in the men and women's area. I would advise everyone, even if all you can do is read a voiceover in a class, something very small, it doesn't matter what it is, go to the North office, turn your name in, and ask, how can I get involved in this work? What can I do in this work? Find a position in this work. And the ones that are over that will delegate to you what it is that you can do. And I can guarantee you they will be thankful that you did such a thing. May Yahweh bless you. And now let's turn over to the great Khan Zafani.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We got some news articles. And the first one, real quick, is the downgrade of the EU countries by credit rating service. And keep in mind as the news plays that everything that they present to you in the news, when they present a problem, it's because they want you to support their solution. And so for everything here that there's a problem presented, keep in mind they're going to present a solution. And then, of course, we go into Syria again, and then the Straits of Hormuz, and then the Marines, as the Khan was mentioning. Now, with the dead bodies. Now, the last story is a little different. It's really interesting. It's real significant, and most people won't get the significance of it because most people don't study physics and astronomy, but they've just discovered that they say that there's 100 billion planets in the galaxy. Now watch this story. This is real interesting if you follow these things, because, and the scientist mentions this, that before this discovery in the last few years, very recently, the scientists thought there were no other planets besides the ones in the solar system. And he says this in here, you got to catch it, he says it real quick, but it sounds almost like a ridiculous thing to believe there's no other planets in the galaxy. You know, you would think with all these stars there has to be other planets. And he doesn't mention why they thought that, but the reason they didn't think there was any planets is because the Big Bang theory that they have doesn't generate any planets. When they do a simulation in the big computers, no planets come out. And so not only are they saying there's a lot of planets, but what they're saying is, and I had to read this in several places to make sure this was the case, because it's really backs up exactly what Israel Hawkins has been saying all along, that Yahweh made this, and this is in Isaiah 45:18, that Yahweh made the universe to be inhabited. And this is what they're discovering. And it says that astronomers have estimated that each of the 100 billion stars in the Milky Way probably has at least one companion planet. And you think about that, that proves Isaiah 45:18, and it proves what Israel Hawkins is teaching us. So let's play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're seeing today is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to YPN News.
Bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy. Jeff, what's going on in our global neighborhood?
Well, Katan, it looks like the European financial crisis is only getting worse. 9 European countries had their credit ratings downgraded this week by the rating agency Standard & Poor's. However, this is not just bad news to the Europeans. The Department of Commerce reported that the U.S. exports to Europe plummeted nearly 6% in November.
Now, Standard & Poor's sent a clear signal today that it believes the European debt crisis is not over. More than half of the Eurozone countries were downgraded, including Italy, Portugal, and Spain, which had their credit ratings knocked down 2 notches.
Now, Austria and France saw theirs cut by 1 notch. France, which was rated as a AAA, has now joined the ranks of the U.S., being rated as a AA plus country. Standard & Poor's says that Europe's attempts to solve its debt crisis were insufficient.
Now, this evaluation is reminiscent of the U.S.'s own downgrade last August, when S&P said the downgrade reflects our opinion that the fiscal consolidation plan that Congress and the administration recently agreed to falls short of what, in our view, would be necessary to stabilize the government's medium-term debt dynamics.
Now, many of the European countries remain on negative watch, which means they could be downgraded even more. So, what does this mean for our own economy, you may be wondering?
Well, if just one European country defaults, it could cause a seizure in the whole financial system, which in turn could cause a collapse in banks all around the world. And while no one wants to see this get any worse, there are no signs of recovering anytime soon.
Oh. Well, for now we go to an update on the ongoing crisis in Syria. We turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, for the latest on this situation. Larry, what do you have for us?
Thanks, Jeff. More monitors were dispatched to Syria this week in an ongoing effort coordinated by the Arab League to attempt to halt the mounting death toll of Syrian protesters in what is turning out to be a very bloody uprising. The latest group of observers arrived in Syria today, saddled with the task of verifying whether or not the Syrian government has ceased employing violence as a means of extinguishing the country's current unrest. As the monitors arrived and departed towards their first destination, flanked on their right by a van full of Syrian soldiers led by 2 police cars and accompanied by additional bodyguards, the observers were anything but inconspicuous and arrived at Syria's Criminal Justice Detention Center for a government-led, pre-arranged tour of detainee conditions, which former observer Anwar Malik described as a farce and a perfect example of Syrian whitewashing. While that observation may seem harsh, it is nonetheless one echoed by many who question the effectiveness of the Arab League strategy, which has provided 167 observers to monitor an uprising which is reported to be taking root in cities across the country. To date, over 5,000 people are reported to have lost their lives in the revolt, and the observers, a small group of which recently had their vehicle attacked by government loyalists in the city of Latakia, are in some cases barely escaping harm themselves. This latest round of observers are scheduled to depart Syria this coming week and are expected to provide a full report to the Arab League by Thursday. Upon hearing it all, CBS reporter Scott Pelley commented that the entire process seemed rather futile and questioned whether or not the monitor's presence had been sufficient to prevent any deaths. To which CBS correspondent Elizabeth Palmer reported, the current UN tally for deaths related to the Syrian unrest since the monitors arrived is 40 deaths per day. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Tom, Jeff, back to you.
Wow. Thanks, Larry. The turmoil continues to bubble over in the Persian Gulf as a recent video has been released showing speedboats from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard harassing a U.S. warship in the Straits of Hormuz. The boats came within 500 yards of the U.S. vessel, ignoring both whistles and voice signals asking their intentions.
Now, later that day, more video was captured showing speedboats using the same tactics towards a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, but this time inside the Persian Gulf. Although the U.S. Navy is used to this type of routine posturing, they were very attentive due to the statements that Iran has made threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz.
Now, those statements have not gone unnoticed by the U.S. government. Secretary of Defense Panetta said in a recent public release, "We cannot tolerate Iran blocking the Straits of Hormuz." Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the Iranian leaders have also had this same message delivered to them in private. The U.S., of course, is making sure that they get all their bases covered in this matter.
Now, although this is a heightened situation, most officials don't believe that Iran would take such a drastic measure, seeing as though a move would cripple its own economy by stopping its own oil exports, as well as alienating every country which depends on the Middle East oil. Now, CBS News reported that Iran does have the ability to close the strait, but only briefly and only once. After that, its navy would be destroyed.
Now, there's been a video that's drawing a lot of international attention this week, which shows U.S. Marines desecrating dead bodies in Afghanistan. The 4 Marines who appear to be urinating on dead bodies are members of a sniper team. The 1,000-man battalion lost 7 men killed in action and is now back home at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where more than just a few who showed their faces could be liable of criminal charges.
The Naval Criminal Investigative Services, the NCIS, has been called in with orders to investigate every aspect of the video. That includes not just the urinating, which is a violation of the law of war against desecrating bodies, but whether the dead men are really even Taliban fighters or just local farmers, and why snipers who are trained to kill from a long distance are standing over the dead bodies.
Secretary of Defense Panetta called Afghan President Karzai to promise the full investigation, and other senior officials, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Secretary of the Navy, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and even Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had this to say. I join him in condemning these deplorable behaviors that is reflected in this video.
Now, she went on to say that this is absolutely inconsistent with American values. Anyone found to have participated or known about it, having engaged in such conduct, must be held fully accountable. The Taliban has also released a statement saying the Americans will see with their own eyes the increased anger and hatred of the Afghan people.
Well, on to a more positive note. Scientists have estimated in a recent released report that our galaxy, the Milky Way, has over 100 billion planets.
Now, you said billion.
That's billion with a B. Billion planets. That's approximately 1 planet to every star. Robert Lee Holtz, a WSJ senior science correspondent, said, a few years ago, we didn't even think there were other planets besides those in our own solar system. Now, there are thousands that are being detected.
Wow. 42 scientists from the Institute for Astrophysicists in Paris spent 6 years surveying about 100 million stars at the heart of the Milky Way galaxy as a representative sample for the rest of the galaxy.
Now, although astrobiologists, astrophysicists, and other scientists are still scratching their heads as to whether or not there's life out there, there's one thing that's for sure. We're not the only planet in our galaxy, and we're definitely not the only one in our universe.
Well, Katan, maybe someday we'll get to go on assignment to one of these planets.
Well, I sure look forward to our coverage expanding. Stay tuned as Yisrayl Hawkins brings you more Bible prophecies and the news that relates to it. For YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for joining us.
Everyone, please stand for the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins. Praise Yahweh.
Oh, this is beautiful. Wow, looks like we started the feast. You know Yahweh's loving this. I almost hate to stop it. You may be seated. No, get up one more time. Oh, what a praise to Yahweh that was. That was beautiful, beautiful. I want you to keep in mind that last thing, 100 billion. Man, I've always said the House of Yahweh, they do the hard jobs instantly, but the impossible takes us just a little bit longer. But I can see we have our work cut out for us. And this is not going to occur suddenly either. We're going to get may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to get a lot of help, of course, when we resurrect all those who have died before us. But you think about 100 billion, and you know that could be 200 billion. You know, they don't know. They're just now getting to where they can see, out there and see that it's not what they thought it was, and that there was a creation plan, and they see that now. So that knocks Darwin out of the grave. I bet he's turning over in his grave right now. No, he won't turn over till we resurrect him. But boy, you think about that. It's so beautiful what is coming over the news now. And of course, the plan that Yahweh is His plan that He's bringing forth, and the signs in heaven. I hope that's your gossip now. I hope that takes all of your time for gossip, that these clouds and what is being seen in the clouds over His house. And it'll mean a lot more to you when I get through with this sermon and the next few that goes with this, because I didn't realize the prophet spoke this much on it. But after I saw that first one, the donkey, of course, Yahweh started bringing to my memory other scriptures, and of course they add up to the fact that Yahweh is going to communicate to us, but it's more than a communication to us; it's a protection. It's a protection of this work that He shows, and of course we'll see that in a little bit. But I do believe from what we have seen, not just in the clouds, but we've seen other things taking place around us, especially of a night when you can see FUOs out there, and if you want to call them that. It doesn't seem like the news media can find out what they are, but I do know that the gods hate the house of Yahweh. They probably hate the house of Yahweh more than the people around us hate the house of Yahweh, and that's extreme. When you start telling people their sins, as Yeshua did, and as He is doing today through His house, because He is the high priest over this house of Yahweh in these last days, and He's bringing His same message that He brought when He was before He was murdered on earth. He's bringing that same message to all the nations now on earth. So the hatred is really building, and of course there are spirit beings out there that Yahweh counsels with. They don't take His advice, as the Psalms show, but He shows them where they're making their mistakes, and of course the mistakes that He shows them, mankind is making here on earth because they're following the gods. They're not following Yahweh. If they're following Yahweh, they'd be keeping His laws and at His house and keeping His appointments at His house. But they're following the gods that are having trouble and having wars. And now remember this, that Yahweh is well protected in His kingdom in the heavens, as the prophet said, your glory is firmly set. That's meaning that everyone knows, all the universe knows what He teaches, but the government He follows, they would probably try to destroy Yahweh, probably have tried to destroy him, and many times, but he cannot be reached the way that he's set up. If you had all the nuclear bombs on earth and pointed them at Yahweh Shammai, they might make tiny dents in it, but there's no way that you could destroy that city the way he has it built if you just study it. Well, of course, that's also from that headquarters comes the power of protection, because if someone steps out of line, and Satan knows this, otherwise she would have destroyed Eob or Yashub. She would have destroyed him, but Yahweh said, no, don't take his life, but you can go this far. And that's as far as Satan went. Satan contended, if you remember, for the body of Moshe, because she has the same frame of mind that I guess is shown in the soldiers. What really bothers me is the schools of higher learning. They teach this hatred, and then they condemn the soldier boys for displaying it. Satan teaches this hatred, and she, as the young priest to be this morning, brought out very eloquently the way that Satan hates everyone around her, and she'd like to rend them like a rag. And of course, she wanted the body of Moshe to do the same thing too. But this shows the mentality of taking delight in desecration, or trying to bring harm to people, fighting wars and so forth. We didn't see the film today, but yesterday evening on the news, world news, it seemed like they ran out of iPhones in a few of the stores in China, and of course we're selling them to them, I guess. I don't know why they're not making their own iPhones, but one store, I understand, saw them fighting outside, so they locked the doors and wouldn't let them in. And they're wanting to beat up the store owners, and they're fighting each other because they wanted an iPhone, and all the other stores had sold out. So this was their last chance to get an iPhone. This mentality that they have, they can't read one verse out of a book, but they want to sit all day punching buttons. And now this is in the brain of the people, and of course the brain certainly reacts to this, and it gets so that that's all you crave. It's like craving silver or gold. So you start craving this enough to kill for it. That's the world that we're living in right now, and of course Yahweh is saying to us, take this message to the world, knowing full well they're not going to accept it right now. But as the prophecies unfold, which they're unfolding right now before everyone's eyes, and we're bringing it to their attention. And of course these clouds, the clouds over the sanctuary, and what is shown here over the land of Yahweh, and the hatred we see among the people, the world, is the same hatred that's among the gods, and we know that they are Satan is trying to destroy Yahweh's house, as she's always done, but he says, no, that's it for the destruction of my house, and he says, hands off. Now, I've brought you those sermons before, but he's also shows it in the cloud, he says, the prophets show that he is going to protect his house. Now, whatever the gods are trying to do to get at his house, it may be these as a warning, saying, you better keep your hands off of this, because I've got guards watching you. And I'm talking about Yahweh's guards, very powerful beings that can direct big hailstones to actually destroy a planet if they want to. Now, I saw myself the donkey over the land of Yahweh, the donkey cloud. And I was somewhat amazed, extremely amazed, I guess, because it was not moving. It was stationary, and the donkey was staring at a cloud in front of it, like it was tied to it, not with a rope or anything, but total devotion, I do believe, and staring at this cloud in front of it. And of course, I didn't understand what it was there, but I finally decided Yahweh is showing me something here. So I didn't know this, and just the cloud alone, and me seeing that cloud, that wouldn't mean anything to anyone. In fact, my enemies would laugh about it, and if that was all Yahweh had to offer, my enemies would laugh, and they would make real bad remarks. Did you know that the the prophets, actually prophesied that they would, and said they would scoff at these, when he showed this sign? I'll show that to you. See, Yahweh knows. He knows their every move, the enemy's moves as well as the moves of his house. But this wouldn't have meant anything to anyone, or at least not nearly as much as the way that Yahweh had planned to bring this about. After I saw that, this was on the 25th, of course. Then on the 28th is what you saw, what they showed you there, and we had all the elders watching. I was watching. All the elders was up on top of the sanctuary. And the young priest also was watching for that new moon, the Feast of Trumpets. And, of course, if you think about the Feast of Trumpets is to celebrate, in fact, the last trumpet, the last trumpeter. As I've brought you those lessons before also, but we'll glance back at some of them. But the Feast of Trumpets is to celebrate those 7 works. Feast of Trumpets. And it's the blowing of trumpets. Well, what does that mean? The blowing of trumpets. Yahweh has 7 trumpets that he said he was going to blow. And in these last days, he has a trumpet that he's blowing right now. Well, that's the feast that's going to be celebrated throughout all eternity. And the people are going to have the history of the house of Yahweh, of course, before them. The history of the destruction that is also shown in the 4 horns, 4 great powers that Yahweh has allowed to rule the earth and bring it to destruction, and that destruction is coming, and surely anyone can see that right now. It's getting closer daily, but then Yahweh shows us in the cloud, a sign with the word age and a period behind it. That should start meaning something too to everyone. And the more you gossip about it, the more it will be set in your mind what is going to take place. But on the 28th, the priest and everyone who desired to see up there with the priest that night, they saw this cloud appear, this cloud that I saw in front of the donkey. It appeared the second time in front of all these priests on the Feast of Trumpets, and we didn't even realize what we were looking at the time, but the way he brought it out, he made someone notice it. So you could tell he's in charge of what is going on. This donkey, the donkey cloud, of course, you've got to know the prophecies before that, or the fact that the same cloud appeared on the Feast of Trumpets to the elders. That wouldn't mean anything either, if you didn't know the prophecies that go with it. And these prophecies, see, they are proving themselves. As we put in the song, and in actual fact, the children were singing that song when the elders decided to put it on television, the children doing it, and they decided to put that tree on top of the sanctuary the very time that that song was being sung. That one of the verses said that we haven't asked for riches or fortune, but we do ask, we do see that the prophecies prove themselves, and that's all we want is to follow Yahweh. And of course, I forgot the exact verse there, but it'll come back to me later. Let's go over to Genesis 49 and start with this prophecy again. We haven't covered all of this yet. You may think we have, but I do want you to pay close attention to everything here, because this prophecy here is what was prophesied for Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim, remember, becoming a multitude of nations. A multitude of nations. And Manasseh also becoming strong and with a lot of nations. But Ephraim becoming this multitude of nations that all the preachers talk about, and they even know that and try to distinguish each nation as being Ephraim or Ephraimites. I remember a preacher not too many years ago bringing out the fact that that the United States and Britain were part of that multitude of nations that they were talking about. Well, they had part of it, right? They are part of that multitude of nations, but that's not the total makeup of Ephraim and Manasseh. But here in Genesis 49, always read verse 1 first, and look at the last two words in that verse, because that's what we're in right now, and all the prophecies point to this time period. Then you go down to verse 10, and you see the scepter, which Hebrews says is a scepter of righteousness, of a person who kept the laws of Yahweh, and he teaches those laws. And obedience of the nations is shown in the very last line of verse 10. Obedience of the nations. This is what is going to bring the obedience of the nations. Obedience to Yahweh. The plan that Yahweh has planned for the 12 tribes of Israel, for Ephraim and Manasseh, the multitude of nations they have become, all fighting against one another today as they fought in the tiny land of Israel after he brought them out of the land of Egypt. They fought one another. Well, they spread out, took over the world, including the United States, and they're fighting among one another at this time, wanting to kill each other, and not only wanting to kill each other, but to desecrate each other. That's the extreme hatred you see, as Yahweh showed you in this chapter here, of what the 12 tribes would be in the last days. And he says all of these genes now is going to be mixed together in one witch's brew, a witch's concoction that's going to be in the minds and hearts of all the people. But he's going to draw out certain people out of this time period and show that he can, and he has, and he's brought them, and they now have the branch now has the full attention of that donkey. And he shows Yahshua, who qualifies for the scepter of righteousness to bring about this work. And Yahweh says, tethering his donkeys to the vine, that's himself, and the donkey's coat to the choice branch. Now this will bring this about to where they will have righteousness. Their garments will be washed in white with the laws of Yahweh. Now, the donkey to the vine, the donkey's coat to the branch. Now, let's go over to Zechariah, the 9th chapter, and you might guess, but I'm speaking of the clouds now, and keep that in mind, and the signs in the clouds. This, to me, it should be the most exciting thing, praise Yahweh, outside the study of the book of Yisrayl, of course. But keep that in mind now, what we just read about the thithering his donkeys, and look at chapter 9 of Zechariah, and we see another prophecy where he is writing in chapter 9 and verse 9 of Zechariah, "Rejoice greatly, O daughters of Zion." Now, of course, daughters of Zion, if you don't know that by now, it actually means those who keep the 613 laws. That is not it. I may not have that verse 9, no. But rejoice greatly. Now that is, he's speaking of you. Yahweh says, go to his house and rejoice. That's the first law. Rejoice at his house. Eating both spiritual and physical foods at his house. So rejoice greatly, O daughters of those who keep the 613 laws. Behold, your king comes to you. He is just and having salvation. He's lowly, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So he's riding on two different ones, the donkey and the foal of a donkey, riding both of them. So then, of course, let's go over to Matithia, Matithia 21. Matithia 21 and verse 5, we see here, rejoice greatly, where he quotes this prophecy for us and says, rejoice greatly in this. Now, he's rejoice greatly in this news that the king has come, of course, but for you, rejoice greatly that you're the last of the lamps, and this is being explained to you. And that's why Yahweh says, yeah, now you have their full attention. And that's what he showed in that donkey in the cloud. Praise Yahweh. Now, rejoice greatly, O daughters of Zion. Shout for joy, which you did. That was the best I've seen when I came out just a few minutes ago. O daughters of Jerusalem, behold, your king comes to you. He is just and having salvation. All of these words here that it looks like we added, we didn't add, we just took the direct verse from the prophets. For some reason, they didn't want to put them in, so when they copied this, but we put them in because it shows it comes directly from the prophets. He's riding on a donkey, and should be, and a colt, the foal of the donkey, and all the commentators know that for sure, what I just told you. Now, notice in Zechariah, go back to Zechariah again, 9, Zechariah 9, and we'll read this now, but I won't elaborate on it till I give you some more scriptures and make sure that you can understand it. But I want you to notice what he says here. We got enough right here, and even in the King James Version, for you to see something that Yahweh is pointing out for this last generation, the colt of the donkey. The foal of the donkey is the last and final house of Yahweh audience, which you are right now. Now, in Zechariah 9 and verse 14, he says, Yahweh will be seen over them. Did you see that? Now, what could he possibly mean by that? Yahweh will be seen over them, or Yahweh will appear, as one translation has it, Yahweh will appear over them. How is Yahweh going to be over them or seen over them? We'll come back to that later, but on August the 25th, the donkey cloud appeared over the land of Yahweh. In fact, it looked like it was covering the whole thing, but that donkey, when I went back and looked at the surroundings there, I could tell that donkey was directly over that homestead house. I don't have the date, but I know we could come up with it. But I think we've we've brought it out in enough sermons. But when I built that house, I built it with a study where I could have a private room to write. And that's where the work of Yahweh in this area began. And it was dedicated after the house was built. My brother came back from Israel, set up in Odessa, but he came down. When we built that house, he came down here. I had a small congregation coming to weekly services in the living room. Fixed them a meal. Fixed them a meal every sixth day and served them every seventh day. And there's some of those people that are still here who came to that first meeting. And but the living room, when Jacob and his crew came, it was too small for everyone to get in, so we moved out on the back patio. Had no covers over us at all, and that's where the work of Yahweh was dedicated, on that patio outside the homestead house. It's still there. The patio is still there, and we got a sign over it right now that says "Praise Yahweh." But on that day, on the 25th of August, we see this. I see it. This marvelous cloud, not moving, stationary, perfect donkey, tail and all, with a pack on its back and ears perked towards what we found out later was that olive tree that has now become the logo of the House of Yahweh. Praise Yahweh, which represents, of course, the two witnesses. But on the 25th, let me see, I was thinking I wanted to show you something there. On the 25th, now on the 28th, on the 27th, I told you of this, I told everyone in the audience on the 27th what I saw. On September the 28th, this was just at sunset. We were all watching this cloud, and we saw this same shaped cloud again, hiding the Feast of the Trumpets new moon. It was actually hiding it. And if you think of the skill that the Savior has to hide that new moon, let a person see it at a certain place. Let us peek at it here, because I did see what I thought was the new moon. I said, yes, I see it, but I couldn't see all of it. And when the phone call came, then the person described that cloud to me so I could see where exactly the new moon was. Now, being miles apart here, yet seeing the same cloud, and we took a picture of it so we know it's it. And they described it, and I said, yes, that's what I'm looking at, but I wasn't sure because we can't see all of it here. We can't see all the new moon. But think of the skill of controlling a cloud, hiding a moon in it, and making someone describe that cloud to where they'd get that cloud set in their mind. And we didn't even know it at the time, see, that this was the cloud, the same shape at all. But Yahweh said it in the beginning. He actually told you in the beginning. Let's turn back to Genesis, the 2nd chapter. Genesis 2. And if you'll just watch in all the work, all the history of the house of Yahweh, including Yahshua and his work, the disciples and their work, the apostle Shaul and his work, in Genesis 2, verse 18. You see that? It's not right that man should be not satisfactory that for his work. It's not satisfactory that man should do this alone. You got a helpmate. You got many helpmates in the house of Yahweh. It's not satisfactory. A woman was brought in to see this. This occurred many times, you know. Yahshua included, if you turn over to Yochanan now, Yochanan 4, you'll see this same thing taking place in Yahshua's work, but not in just this place, but in many places. Yahweh did not leave out. He has special work for women. I always think of Hannah. And of course, the story of Samuel is this, it's there constantly in my mind. And the way this man was raised. Hannah was a very righteous woman who Eli thought she was drunk because she went there and he was the high priest, and she went to Eli, and she was praying, and he was close enough to her to talk to her, and she quickly told him she wasn't drunk, but he heard her prayer. He took it to Yahweh, and Yahweh blessed her with a boy, whom she named Samuel. She went back. She finally gave Samuel to the priest, but she went back home to her husband, raised Samuel up to a certain age. After he was weaned, she took him to the priest, and the priest, very early, Yahweh started working with this man, this boy. Very early in life. And he was devoted to that work, totally devoted to the work. Have I got your attention, boys? Of course, I want you to be like Yahshua, but these prophets, they set you examples of how to be like Yahshua. And Samuel, he learned his lessons well in advance. He was a very humble man, obeyed the priest in every way, and then he expected that out of the ones that he led for many, many years. And of course, their work is what has come down to us today in the prophets. The prophets started there with that school, and of course, he brought many of them out of this work in Israel, bringing forth the laws of Yahweh to them and the prophecies to them. But anyway, Samuel was a very righteous man that led the 12 tribes for many, many years and led them in righteousness. And here now, Yahshua, in chapter 4 of Yochanan, in verse 25, he says, "The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah comes, and when he comes, he will tell us all things. And Yahshua said to her, I am he speaking to you. Well, of course, like the cloud, we didn't know what we were seeing, but she was talking to the vine that tied the first donkeys, 12 of them, to himself, and now is tying the donkey's colts to the chosen branch that is to do the work in the last days house of Yahweh. Now at this, his disciples came and were astonished that he was talking with a woman. But no man asked, what did you want? Or what were you talking about with her? But they were astonished. Well, the fact is, as the great Kohan Shaul is brought out many times, Yahweh owns the people. We don't own one another, but Yahweh owns the people, and he gives people work in the house of Yahweh. And it's not right that man do it alone. Pope. The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city, and she started gossiping with the men and telling them what she had seen. And that work has never stopped right there. A work that spread from person to person has never stopped. From that one woman. Well, of course, that's the reason that you see this included in throughout the Holy Scripture. Now, if you think of all the holy women, just think about this. Are you children listening now? Just think about this. Abraham and what's her name? What's the name? I can't hear you. Oh, Sarah, yeah. Almost forgot that there for a minute. Abraham and Sarah, Boaz and Mary. What? Oh. Okay. Well, I'm glad y'all are up on it. You can keep me straight. Just pay close attention. Keep me straight. Don't let me make a mistake here. So Yahweh has in these last days honored women. He honors them every day right here in the house. You see this. In fact, now there's been several sightings. The one was the box letter, which the great Kohan Yehuda has much to show you there, and he's been studying this for many years, and so, it was easily for him to recognize this, and it's great that we see these things in detail. Then we can recognize them when Yahweh shows it to us. But that box that he put the letters in actually is the highest Hebrew letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the original Hebrew alphabet, and it means House of Yahweh. That's where Yahweh is. And, of course, we got it on the screen there if you want to look at it. When praise Yahweh, he is honoring the children too. He is. Greatly. I marveled at that speech this morning of the young man. If you'll turn over to Yael right quickly, this was a prophecy also where he uses the women. He uses them to train priests of Yahweh. He uses them in serving food, as Sarah, Abraham's wife, did. That is one of the great things, just one of the many thousands of things that the women are involved in. But here in Yael now, too, in verse 28, he says, and it will come to pass afterwards, and that actually means in the last days, after the first, But afterwards, that is in the last days, I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, that is, all who will come to his house. No one outside of his house, but in his house. That's where they receive. You can't leave out some and take the other. He says, even inside my doors of my house, I will pour my Spirit on them. That's what Isaiah said. Well, here he says, afterwards, or in the last days, I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy. That means to teach or preach or to show prophecy. And look at verse 29. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days I will pour my Spirit. Well, of course, this is speaking of help that we have. If you go back to the Hebrew and study the words, it means people who hear the message in another nation or in many other nations and start talking about it. Like the woman that Yeshua gave the message to, saying, I'm the one that you're looking for. And they start talking about it and they start spreading that message. Well, that was a sign now. As I told you, I saw the donkey. And I saw it on the 25th of August. Well, somebody told me that they were looking at some of these things, these numbers, and I thought, well, I wonder if that number has anything to do with it. So I looked up the number 25 in the Hebrew. And it actually means, it comes from number 1. 25 comes from number 1 in the Hebrew. Well, that used to be the house of Yahweh, and the one, Yahweh Himself. So that number 25 actually is from number 1 and 1391, which means father or founder. And I thought, well, man, that is great. You know, because Yahweh does things like this. With the mind He has, He can put hidden codes that you have to go to another source to find. So the number 25, it means actually the house of Yahweh, Yahweh Himself, leading this work. I informed you of the donkey cloud on the 27th. Guess what? The number 27 means it's from number 1 also, and number 1777. And it means father of judgment, judge, father of judgment, and also means judge. The next day was the 28th. Now that wouldn't mean anything to me at all, but if you remember, I saw a white stone. And I told everyone about this. Now, would I have the date of when I told everyone, but I hope you remember it. But it had 3 numbers on it. And that white stone had 3 numbers, and one of them was 28. One of those numbers was 28. So it was 17, 28, 74. I think I was 74 at that time when that stone was shown to me, and it came into my mind, or was placed in my mind, this is your lot. Well, I looked up the number 28 then, and guess what? Father of knowledge. Father of knowledge. It comes from number 1 and number 3045. Father of knowledge, that is knowing. Well, if you remember all the prophecies about the one that was named or mentioned from the mother's womb, mentioned my name from the mother's womb, Yahweh actually prophesied that that witness would be of quick understanding, that he would make him so. Let's go over to Isaiah, since we're on the number 28. Let's go over to Isaiah 28. I think we could follow this a long ways. I don't intend to, but I hope others will. But Isaiah speaks, his total life, seemed like, was made up of prophecy predicting this last time period that we're in, predicting the future king that would die for our sins. Isaiah 53 shows Yeshua, if you remember, and the suffering that he was prophesied to go through. He also shows the two witnesses in the last days, House of Yahweh. Well, number 28 here, he said, woe to the crown of pride of the drunkards of Ephraim. Remember Ephraim now. Ephraim and Manasseh, they're the ones the 12 tribes came from. Remember in Genesis 48. I should have left it Isaiah 48 and just to catch you. Would you have corrected me? In Genesis 48, and two brothers were blessed. And Yahweh put the man who used to bless these people, he put the right hand on Ephraim and the left hand on Manasseh. And the father of the boy said, no, Manasseh's older. He says, I know, but the blessing is going to be this way. Ephraim is going to be a multitude of nations. Nobody believes that, you know. They think they're from Gentiles from Mars or someplace, you know. Probably from the Big Bang, you know, it blowed a bunch of the seed this way. Well, no, that's been proven wrong now. Well, anyway, the drunkards, I don't drink, so I can't even identify this now. When I asked you not to participate in alcohol except in Yeshua's memorial, I haven't, of course I quit before that, but I didn't tell anybody, but I decided I didn't want to drink because of the fact that Yeshua said he wasn't going to partake of this till he could partake of it with me and you. So I said, I think I'm going to forego that from now on. And I still have drinks in my house. And I don't intend to give them away. I don't want anyone to drink them. I'm not going to use them myself, and I hope everyone here did the same thing. It's the way it was being used in a few places, it's very unhealthy that way and actually ruins the mind. But here in 28 now, he's speaking of people who didn't quit drinking, and the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower. It's a going away. And if you look on down to verse 7, he said, but these have also erred through wine and strong drink and so forth. Their tables are filled with vomit and filthiness, nothing clean on those tables. I don't know if we showed that today, but there was news yesterday showing the pork sausage. Did you see that? Causing pancreatic cancer. We need to get that film and show it, but they've actually proven now that this sausage, any kind of pork, you know how unclean pork is. The Scripture tells you how unclean it is. And, of course, the parasites in it, they get in the pancreas. And they may not tell you that in this scientific finding, but they know it's causing cancer now. They know that for a fact. And they're going to try to play it down, I'm sure, because the pork industry is, they pay a lot of taxes, a lot of tithe to the Catholic Church, and they certainly don't want to knock that out, you know. I mean, they have got a Catholic mass out there, or mess, whatever they call it, in the pig pen with them. Well, that's where a mess belongs, isn't it, in the pig pen? You know, Circe, where you get the word church, she turned her victims into swine. How did she do that? She killed them and threw them in the pig pen. The pigs ate them, and then they ate the pigs. And that's where you get the word church. That's where it comes from. That's more the desecration of people. You see, it didn't start here with these soldier boys. These soldier boys are not even guilty of this. You know, yes, they're guilty of the act, but the education that taught them this, that's the guilty part. Well, their tables are full of filth, Yahweh says. And then he says in verse 9, in this same chapter now, verse 28, notice, who will I teach knowledge? Who am I going to teach knowledge? Some of the Malachim? No, those that are weaned from the breast. Yeshua said, I've received this authority because I was weaned from the breast. I am a son of man. And he received this authority because I am the Son of Man. And that's the reason we're going to receive it. Not because we're sons of the gods. No. I don't want to become a god. Let me not be found in that council. For precept, and then he shows how he does it. Precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, here a little and there a little. Why did he fix it that way? Why did he fix the Bible in that manner? For with stammering lips, and another tongue will I speak to this people. Now he's talking about the last day's work in this very chapter here we're reading. To whom he said, this is the rest, and then he identifies the fact that this man is going to bring forth the truth about his Sabbath day. We're the first ones in 2,000 years, brethren, that knows how to keep the Sabbath. Yes. You know why? We're fastened to the one who qualified for the scepter of righteousness, who is now leading us. Yes, praise Yahweh. Remember, between the two of them, between the both of them, they're going to bring forth obedience of the nations to Yahweh. That's the final work, bringing forth that obedience to the nation. To whom he said, this is the rest with which you may cause the weary to rest. And this is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. No, they're not hearing it, but they will very soon. Yahweh's way is going to work. But the word of Yahweh was to them, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little and there a little, so they might go and fall backwards and be broken and snared and taken, dying in their own filth from their own tables. In fact, Isaiah in 65 said, they worship the dead, Halloween, they keep memorials to the dead, Halloween, and they eat swine's flesh. The abominable broth is in their bodies, giving them pancreatic cancer now, they find out. It gives them a lot more than that. I tell you, when it crosses with the STDs, it is really a moneymaker in the hospitals and drugstores. The sources of sorcery. It's really a moneymaker in the sources of sorcery. Don't, when you get to that part in one of the newsletters I've written, study it very carefully, the sorcery that they will not repent of. It comes forth from Hollywood. Before Hollywood, it came forth from the Catholic Church. Before they called themselves Catholics, it came forth from the priest of Jerusalem in Israel, in the land of Israel, calling themselves Pharisees at that time. Before that, they were calling themselves, in the days of Isaiah and Jeremiah, they were calling themselves the priest of Yahweh, and they took over the temple. Well, now they call themselves Catholics. They still celebrate Halloween, and they still, as is Isaiah 65 shows, and they still eat swine's flesh, even though it's killing them. Their tables are full of vomit, full of abominations. Verse 14, therefore hear the word of Yahweh, you scornful men who rule the people in Jerusalem. Look on down to verse 16. Therefore, this is what Yahweh the Father says. Behold, I lay in Zion. Now notice, the Father. This is what Yahweh the Father says. That's what that word means, number 25, and it goes back to number 1, and then the number 27 goes also back to number 1, the Father, Yahweh. Behold, I lay in Zion a foundation. This is speaking of Yeshua now, in the midst of these enemies that he's speaking about. Here is the way out. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm laying in Zion the foundation. That was the apostles. That was the donkey, one of the donkeys that he rode. He's speaking of that right here. Same mention in Genesis 49. I didn't notice my time was up, but let's go finish this part right here and then we'll quit. I lay in Zion the foundation, the apostles, the first donkey, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone. Of course, that's Yeshua. A sure foundation. He who believes will not be ashamed. Also, I will set justice. He will bring justice and righteousness. Notice the righteousness also. The hail will sweep away the refuge of lies. Look on down to verse 22. The third line of verse 22. Father Yahweh of hosts, a degree of consumption, destruction, is determined upon the whole earth. It's determined upon the whole earth. Well, that destruction is going forth throughout the whole earth now, in the way of sickness and disease, partially caused by what Isaiah named in Isaiah 65. But that precious cornerstone that Yahweh laid, whose name was Yeshua, salvation, that precious cornerstone, of course, has a work right now that he is bringing forth, that he says is tied to the chosen branch that will reach all nations. Isn't it a coincidence that somebody is actually reaching all nations today, a tiny group of people? This is going to get better next week. Now, I haven't left this sermon that I was going on before this. It's just merely that I'm cutting in to bring this, and then we'll go back to that was last week, or no, the week before, maybe it was the week before that. But talk about this. Talk about it to each other a lot. And watch the clouds. I've become a cloud watcher now. You know, I look up every once in a while to see. The other day, I was so aggravated. I came out from the southeast corner of the campground, and I looked up at the cloud, and I studied it, and I said, no, there's nothing up there. A few minutes later, some women, yeah. Like, what was Abraham's wife's name again? No, we're going to name them. Some women looks up, and they see the name Yahweh, and I think it was in Hebrew. And all of this is written down, but the teachers and the children all saw this thing. And I just passed by. I get very jealous when we look for a new moon and I can't see it. and the other elders can. The other priests can see it. I get really jealous about that. Now I'm really jealous because they saw it, and I'm going to be beating you the next time. I'm going to watch for this. I'm going to get my binoculars the next time I see a cloud. Because the message, we're going to see more and more of this. And Yahweh is telling us something. So watch it closely. Number one, he's got a sign stationed over this house of Yahweh. And I know this from the scriptures. And he's saying, hands off. This is my work. It's going to finish it. I'm going to finish this work. Praise Yahweh. I love you, brothers and sisters. Yahweh bless you.